Hey,
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. This is Joe. Haven't hosted one of these in a while. We have a pretty full house tonight. Joining me are Cody, Justin, and we have a very rare blue sighting on this episode.
Bye.
Don't want to spoil our topic just yet, but we will be drawing on some of his expertise when we get to that. Before we do, though, let's talk a little bit about some things we've been up to in the past week or two. Let's start off with Blue, since it's been so long since we've seen you. You been up to anything fun?
Well, let's see. Not really. I feel like most of my spare time is going to be like it's my last week of freedom. Working a lot and trying to work while having a toddler at home or a 4-year-old.
Mm.
And
Does not sound fun.
And then I guess we're going out east here in a little bit. So that kind of doing one last hurrah to summer before the school year begins. So
Nice.
yeah. And with that, a lot of my spare time is like being outside and running. So
I don't actually
that's
know
boring.
where are you working at these days? I don't actually know.
working on the computer. I work for a software company.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a company called Persephone AI Incorporated. And we
You're part of the problem.
yeah, part of the problem. And we do carbon accounting. So we help enterprise level corporations calculate their carbon footprint using AI and software technologies. So
that actually sounds
the
really
planet's on
cool.
fire. Have you noticed that, y'all? Canada is basically
What?
yeah, it's on fire right now. So yeah, not to bring us down, but yeah, that's what I've been up to.
It's all
No
part
big
of our
deal.
plan to buy land cheap for global warming.
Yeah.
Never letting this guy back on the podcast.
Yep. See you later.
Debbie Downer.
Justin, have you been up to anything more upbeat?
Yeah. I've bit by bit been starting to play through a game that wasn't on my radar for like the top 10 list we did, but I'm starting to think it should have been. I picked up Baldur's Gate 3, and it's good so far. I mean, I think it is. I'm not terribly far, but I think from what I've experienced, it is worth the praise it's been getting. Like even just the opening cinematic, let alone the opening sequence that you fight through, it's if it doesn't grab your attention, I'm not sure what would. I mean, it involves dragons, it involves like dimension hopping, it involves a tentacled skyship captained by Lovecraftian horrors. I mean, it is it is a great opening to a game, and one of the most unique I've seen in quite some time.
Sounds like that game was made just for you.
It might have been. But yeah, that's kind of been my main diversion lately. Otherwise, at work we have a bunch of people out. Some are sick, and I have that in air quotes because our supervisor is on vacation for 2 weeks, and it just so happened to coincide with someone taking a week or calling in for a week because they were sick. Other people, it's been, I don't know. I'm not sure if it's the cat's away, the mice will play kind of situation, but the timing seems suspect. So I've been pulling a lot of extra shifts because of that, but it's nothing I'm really a stranger to. So so having a massive or like a major game release like Baldur's Gate 3 come out to have something to look forward to at the end of the day has been nice in light of all that.
Nice.
Yeah, nothing too much beyond that at this point though.
Cool. Cody, what have you been up to?
I've been dead.
Oh, all right. Well, moving on.
All right, moving on. All right, there we go.
First week of school is done. I was exhausted a little more every day, and last night I just wanted to sleep, but I figured I'd give myself just a smidge of free time, so I picked up Near Automata again, and did not realize I was apparently at the final boss fight. So that fight took an hour and 15 minutes, and I did not get to bed early because that's how long that took. But Joe, you'll be happy. Part of the reason I was extra tired is because I went 4 days in a row doing walking. So yay.
Yay, good job.
Woo. I got about 8.5 miles in, just trying to get a little healthier bit by bit again. And I feel like there was something else I was going to mention. I did finish that little mini series comic books I was looking at, DC versus Vampires, which actually was pretty good, but it turns out there must be a third book because it's not done. So suspension point for a
I guess you
while
did not
yet.
actually finish it then.
Yeah, I just finished what I had. So there's that. I'm just excited to say, what do you think, Blue, all night? Here we go. What do you think, Blue?
We'll get there soon enough.
Yeah.
Oh, what have I been doing, you ask?
Yeah.
Nobody
Joel,
asked
what have you been
that.
doing?
Nobody asked that.
I honestly don't really have much to talk about either. Speaking of vampires, though, I did want to give a shout out to What We Do in the Shadows, which is one of my favorite television series. The latest season, I think, has been out for a while now, but we've just been kind of catching up on it. And
So good.
it is so good. If anyone's not familiar, it's a mockumentary series. So think like The Office, except it's following around a group of vampires that live in Staten Island. And it's just hilarious. One of the stars is Matt Berry, who is like one of my favorite people on earth. He's a British.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Hello.
He's a British actor and comedian and musician, and he's just fantastic. But yeah, that show is great. Another show we've been watching recently is Succession, which I don't know if any of you guys watch that, but
So the one about the workplace, they go to work, they come home and their memories are wiped.
no, that is Severance, which is amazing.
Close in
like
spelling, I suppose.
Yeah, Severance is fantastic. I know I've mentioned that on this before. Succession is about rich people being terrible, basically.
Oh yeah,
real
life.
So it's nonfiction.
Kind of. Well, it's I'm assuming it's kind of inspired by like Rupert Murdoch and Fox in that it's about like this foreign-born businessman. In this case, he's supposed to be Scottish, who comes to the US and like builds up a media empire and like is basically trying to like control all the news and everything. And he is getting up there and starts having some health problems. So his super terrible children are all trying to kind of vie for control to see like who will be the one to take over the reins of the company once he steps down, or like dies or can no longer perform his duties. And it is really just like ultra rich people being ultra terrible, but it's also ultra entertaining. That is on Max, and that I think there's 6 seasons, all of which are out. But we just started watching that, so we're still in the first season, but so far definitely recommend. Yeah, anyway, that's what we've been up to.
Nice.
And
I also want to give a shout out to the new Guns N' Roses song, Perhaps, that just dropped.
Wow.
There's a new Guns N' Roses song.
Sounds like it's off of Use Your Illusion, but apparently was made during the Chinese democracy era. But it's got a lot of piano. It's got a lot of hi in the song. 7 out of 10.
Nice. Interesting. I'll have to check that out. Well, to prepare for our topic tonight, I am sipping on some Uncle Nearest Tennessee whiskey.
It's a good clue there, Joe.
Yeah.
Which is a delicious Tennessee whiskey. It's a distillery that is founded and owned by a Black woman which I like to support such businesses.
Great.
And it is named in honor of Nearest Green, who was I believe he's credited as the first Black master distiller in the history of the United States, probably the world. He actually taught Jack Daniel.
Who?
There's an apostrophe. Jack Daniels is possessive. The man's name was Jack Daniel. But Nearest Green was a black man who taught Jack Daniel how to make whiskey and was actually hired as the first master distiller for Jack Daniels. Um,
You say don't buy Jack Daniels because there's
Because white people
something-
stole it.
Well,
I'm
no.
saying
Well,
by
among
Uncle
that-
Nearest because I believe it is founded or at least partially owned now by a group of Nearest Green's descendants.
Cool.
And the whiskey is a lot better than Jack Daniels. So
Hey,
Let's
at least
put that out there.
I imagine Jack Daniels, well, this company, Jack Daniels has basically caused like an ecological disaster in parts of Tennessee because there's whiskey fungus that's like spreading to
yeah, I've heard
tons of
about that.
land.
Does
So
everything
it-
have to circle back to The Last of Us?
Yes,
yeah,
everything.
it's
The
soon-
fungus is taking over.
Sounds
Yeah,
like
this
some
is how it
Florida stuff right
starts.
there.
You have all the what do you call them? The infected. They're just
Yeah.
drunk. Whiskey fungus.
Anyway, the reason I'm drinking Tennessee whiskey is because our topic today
That's right.
is centered in Tennessee. And this is probably one of the weirder topics we have covered on this podcast.
I feel
It's-
like we're breaking new ground here.
Yeah, we're talking about a race,
I don't even know how to classify this on
a
the
foot race. Well,
Is
here's
it?
the
Yeah.
thing. So
true crime, maybe.
maybe, I mean, this is something that I just kind of randomly heard about like 2 weeks ago, maybe even less than that. And it just captured my imagination because I'm always interested in things that are kind of like underground occurrences that actually happen in real life, but like most people have never heard of. And this particular thing is almost like mythological in like the circles that it is known in. And so the topic we're talking about is something called the Barkley Marathons. And there is an S at the end of marathons, and that is very important for reasons we'll get into.
But it's not possessive.
What was that, Justin?
But it's not possessive. Like
It is
Jack
not
Daniels.
possessive. It is plural. The Barkley Marathons is a race that is held every year in Tennessee. It starts in, I believe it's Frozen Head State Park. And it is a very bizarre race for reasons we will delve into. I'm assuming none of you gentlemen had heard about this before I brought this topic to everyone's attention.
I had no idea until the video was posted in chat, and then yeah.
All
I was like,
right.
this is interesting.
Yeah. Well, I'll get into it with just a little bit of background and we can kind of talk about some of these points as we go.
I had never heard of it, but as soon as I told my wife we were doing a podcast on it, she's like, "That was on TikTok like 2 years ago." I was like,
What?
okay,
Well, that
Thank
shows
you.
how cool we all are.
right?
So the Barkley Marathons was founded in 1986 and was supposedly co-founded by two men, one named Lazarus, which is the nickname Lazarus Lake, and the other gentleman apparently is known only as Raw Dog.
Totally not Batman villains.
So Raw Dog is credited as the co-creator, but it seems like Lazarus is at least the face of the event. He's really the one that you'll see in like any articles you read or videos you watch. He seems to really be the one who's more in the forefront. Lazarus Lake is himself an ultra marathoner. Apparently, he has run all manner of races over the course of his life.
He's also a habitual smoker, which is interesting.
Yeah, I
Sounds
thought that was
okay.
interesting too. Like, I honestly kind of wonder how much of his running career is true, just based on seeing him. But
I just assumed he doesn't run anymore than he used to. Is that not true?
Mhm.
well, so I did read. What was that?
I mean, what do you think, Blue?
I mean, I feel like, yeah, the emphysema will eventually catch up to you.
Hmm.
I read. I can't find the year now. Sometime in the past decade, though, he apparently covered
Dog in
the entire United States by foot.
So he's the original Forrest Gump, more or less. Is what you're saying.
Yes. I mean, that would not shock anyone.
He is Johnny Appleseed,
Um,
but he
yeah,
wasn't
20
spreading
in
apples.
2018, he covered the United States on foot, starting in Rhode Island and ending in Oregon. And I mean, he's got to be like well into his 60s at this point, I would think, at least.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, he's been like profiled in various running magazines. Apparently, he organized his first ultra marathon in 1979. And I just discovered shortly before we started recording that he organizes multiple other races every year aside from the Barkley Marathons. So he's apparently just very involved in the running community. He's a runner himself. He also seems like a real character. He gives off strong, like, I'm just gonna say, hillbilly vibes.
Yeah.
Like it seems like he plays that image up too. Like, I don't know how much of it is real and how much of it is him just like putting on this persona. But he comes off as this very sort of like eccentric, mountain man kind of personality. What were your guys? I mean, so I guess I'll say that I believe all of us watched the same documentary about the Barkley Marathons, which is the Barkley Marathons, the race that eats its young.
Mm-hmm. It's a pretty apt title.
Yeah. What were your guys' impressions of Lazarus in this documentary?
When he unrolled that like floor-length map of Tennessee in his attic, it was like, oh, that's totally not marking where he's hidden bodies over the years. He struck me as a very odd duck. It seemed more harmless as the documentary went on, but initially I'm just like, oh, this guy's just weird, and he's so hyper focused on this that I wasn't really sure what to make of him at first, in all honesty. But the more the documentary went on, the more we saw the race in progress and like his organization of it, the more it seemed like he's just kind of an eccentric guy who really, really has a thing for running.
Yeah, I feel like you could just transplant this man and based on his image into like a local dive bar. and that would
I could see him just like sitting he's just there every day.
But it's clear like this is what he's applied himself to in his life. Like, you don't get much of the story of what he accomplished, right? Other than creating the race that he used to run. You don't quite get the sense of what he runs if today. Like, does he run himself personally, or is he just kind of a race organizer? And then there's just some peculiar things, like we haven't quite jumped into it yet, but like so folks have to like do a weird thing to sign up, but then like usually when you're signing up for a race event, you pay a registration fee, and all you pay is like $1.60 to like cover the website fee, and then it's like a license plate if you're a first time participant, and if you have completed the race, you bring a pack of Camel cigarettes, and if you've not completed the race but you've tried before, you have to bring whatever article of clothing that he is low on stock. Like,
it changes every year. So I mean, let's get into kind of the setup of the race,
right?
Like,
I honestly think this is where he gets all of his wardrobe.
It seems it seems like he was saying that. So I mean, Blue, like, so we'll get into the actual application process in a minute, because that's like its whole other thing. But the application fee, is $1.60. And if you're accepted the first time you run, you have to bring a license plate either from your home state or your home country if you're coming internationally.
Mm-hmm.
And then as Blue said, in the following years, the requirements change, allegedly just based on what Lazarus needs that year. So he said one year he just had people bring white shirts, and then he got a ton of white shirts, so he had to change it. And the next year it was socks. He had people bring flannel shirts. So it does kind of seem like maybe that's just where his wardrobe comes from.
Black tar heroin.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm going to go kind of go forward a little bit, and then we'll come back to what I found about the application process.
Okay.
But to kind of further talk about how eccentric this guy is, before we even get into the specifics of the race itself. So the race is held every year in either March or the beginning of April, so around the same time frame every year. And it can start anytime between midnight and 12 p.m. And racers have no idea what time it's going to start until 1 hour before the race starts. Lazarus Lake blows a conch shell.
It's great. Out of nowhere in Tennessee.
Like,
Where did he
just
get
in the
this?
middle of nowhere, Tennessee, this old hillbilly guy just shows up with a conch shell and blows it. It could be like 1 o'clock in the morning. It could be, 11 a.m. That announces that there's an hour to go until race time. And then at the start of the race itself, 1 hour later, runners know that it's time to take off when he lights a Camel Light cigarette. Like he's
The best
just
starting gun
standing
ever.
there with the cigarette, and everybody's just watching with bated breath. And once he lights that cigarette, that's when they can start the race.
I mean, Joe hasn't quite put it yet, but there's like a cult following to this race that we haven't got to. So it's
Yeah.
just like how all of this coalesced around this strange human being.
Well, but
who's
this,
very
I mean,
eccentric.
yeah, I mean, this all speaks to like his eccentricity. It seems like he has a flair for the theatrical. I mean, what do you guys feel about just all that? Like the kind of weird, the conch shell and the cigarette and those weird things.
In retrospect, the more I think about it, okay. You know how there were people who were upset or disappointed that Tom Bombadil was cut out of the Lord of the Rings movies? I think we found him. Yeah, he definitely plays up the mystique of all of this, and there
Yeah,
is
for
certainly a
sure.
mystique. Yeah, and I don't know. The conch shell is just weird. Maybe he just it was the only thing he had from a trip that made noise that carried. But then again, he's got a trumpet that'll come into play later. I don't know. He's bizarre, but somehow he makes it all work. And I honestly think that weird eccentricity of his is part of why people are so drawn to him.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the difficulty of the race, but it's also just the surreal nature of it all.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think going back to the cult-like nature, I feel like there is almost like a cult of people that are just drawn to Laz, like as a personality.
It's pretty much an event that should not have become famous and did become famous somehow. And I
Yeah.
think he enjoys that quite a bit. But I wanted to ask Blue, as a runner, if they told you had a 12-hour window to start the race, like what would that do to your psyche as the participant?
I feel like
That is a
it
good question.
It is a good question. I feel like, it's already, it wouldn't steady your nerves. That's what I would say, right? You just got this 12-hour period of, do I sit around with my thumb up my ass while I like wait for this man to blow on a conch?
Is that a runner thing?
Yeah, that's what I think.
Okay.
It limbers you up, apparently.
Getting every
yeah.
little bit out before you start running, huh? That's a good call.
Yeah. So I don't know why, rhyme or reason. Like it's probably just for reasons that we just get to. It seems like this guy likes to pull people's strings.
Yeah, it seems like it just abuses him.
Yeah, and he's just like, I'll do it whenever I want, right? As
And
opposed to like what would make sense is like you're in the middle of Tennessee in the mountains. Maybe it's, if I was a kind human, it would be like, oh, the forecast looks like shit.
Well,
So, like,
go ahead.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't think that there's anything there's no rhyme or reason to why he would do whatever he does. But yeah, if I was sitting around for 12 hours not knowing when the race would begin, it would be a little bothersome.
I did have a question about that, but Joe will get into the format of the race a little bit later, but I want to come back to that point.
Well, I think let's jump into that now.
Okay.
We can come back to what I found about the application process and stuff later, but let's just jump into the format of the race. So backing up a little bit before the conch shell, before the cigarettes. One
So-
of the things about this race is that there is only one. So nobody knows what the course looks like before they get there. There is a map of the course, which Lazarus himself makes. There's one copy of said map. And before the race, runners each, this is one thing I'm not sure. I don't know if they each only have a specific amount of time with it, but basically all the runners have to try to find time to sit down with this one copy of the map, and they can like make their own copies. Like it looked like a lot of people had like a map of that area, and then they're just trying to like hand draw, like hand copy the trail.
But they're using like compasses and shit to like try to measure distance and like where
Yeah,
the turns
yeah.
are, and it's not like they're copying a map, you know.
No. Well, and it also seems like aside from the actual map that Lazarus gives them like some cryptic clues, because it seemed like they were trying to have to decipher things that he said about like different parts of the race as far as like where certain turns were and stuff.
It's
So
by
like
oh, go on.
no, you go ahead, Justin.
Oh, yeah, like turn right at the tree with 4 trunks. That's next to the tree with 3 trunks, or
Yeah.
the rock that looks like this. It's just if things that if you know the area.
Yeah. Well, but even if you know the area, I think one of the points they make is that it still is all from like Lazarus's perspective. So you're trying to interpret like, oh, is this the tree with 4 trunks that he's referring to? Like,
Was he high when he made that turn, or wasn't he?
has he been high since 1978?
Yeah, this is like honestly, this is the strangest part about this race event is like, and I think we can get into like what I think the type of person that gets attracted to this race is, but it just makes no goddamn sense to me, like why this would be any sort of remote fun. And I had like checked myself. I was like, well, this is technically an ultra marathon. And so I was like, well, most ultra marathons have marked routes. Nowadays, like if you're running any sort of race event that's probably like around a marathon, or if you're doing a cycling event of some sort, you have a GPS route that's already built out for you and uploaded. And so for this to like basically be entirely analog, and you have to probably triangulate between other runners that you cross paths with, like leaves a lot. I mean, I feel like, how do you just not get lost and die in a creek?
Well, people do get lost. I mean, you mentioned GPS. GPS is not allowed. They do like they basically get their own personal map they drew and a compass, and that's about it as far as navigation. And I mean, you bring up a point that even on the course, there is no course. Like, I'm just gonna say that there's no actual course. Like, nothing is marked at all. There's no flags. There's no marking whatsoever.
You should just give the people what they want. Tell them like, how do you know if you're on the right track, Joe?
All right. Well, okay. So let's take a step back. Overview of the race. So what this race actually consists of. The reason that it is the Barkley Marathons, plural, is that it is a loop, and the loop changes every year. There's different terrain, so even people who've run it before can be caught off guard. Officially, the loop is 20 miles, but according to people who have run the race, it's actually closer to true marathon length, which is 26 miles.
So Laz says it's 20 miles.
Yeah, Laz says it's 20.
This is like the most Schrodinger's cat type of logic I've ever seen. Is it simultaneously 20 miles and it's also 26 miles? And everyone's
yes. I mean, I would suspect that the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Like it probably is somewhere between 20, 26 miles.
You probably just assume you get lost.
Yeah.
I noticed in the documentary they were logging 26 a lap.
Yeah.
As they were going, but we can get back to that.
So there's this loop, and the loop for the year stays the same. So it's not like changing every lap, but to complete this race, you have to run this loop a total of 5 times within a 60-hour period. So you have 60 hours to run a total of somewhere between 100 and 130 miles, depending on who you're asking. There are, of course, it can't even be that straightforward. So the way it works is your first 2 loops, you run clockwise. So usually one of those loops is daytime, one of them is nighttime. So that already varies things up a little bit because it's going to be a different experience depending on if you can see or not. The next 2 loops you run are counterclockwise. And again, one day, one night. So, and you're running backwards. So it's a different experience that way. The 5th loop, if you get to it, which most people don't, and there have apparently been several years where nobody makes it to a 5th loop. The 5th loop, the first person who starts gets to choose whether they want to run it clockwise or counterclockwise. And then any other runners who follow them have to alternate. So if there's a second runner, they would go the opposite. And then a third runner would go the opposite of the second runner, so on and so forth.
I think that's like one of the most interesting parts about the whole thing, to be honest.
Yeah, it is really interesting.
I know very few people make it to that 5th lap, but it's interesting to like see somebody just get to the starting line before you and be like, fuck that. I'm going to wait for somebody to take the other route the other way. And then I'm going to jump back on the way I want to go.
I actually, so in the video, I also watched a documentary about this year's race, which was like 40 minutes. And something interesting happened in that, which was specifically affected by the people running opposite directions in the 5th lap. But we'll get to that in a second.
Ooh, what do you know that we don't? That's exciting.
Well, I'll tell you. So
Lazarus is also Leatherface.
So that's kind of the basic like construct of the race. Now, I mentioned that the terrain varies. Apparently, there are a lot of elevation shifts in this race, to the extent that if this documentary is to be believed, each loop requires a total of 12,000 feet of ascent and 12,000 feet of descent. And that adds up to, if you do finish all 5 loops, it's the equivalent of climbing and descending Mount Everest twice. So this is not just a marathon where you're running on, flat ground on a paved road and cruising along on your merry way.
Right.
And I mean, you see in this documentary, there are stretches where like they're like kind of almost climbing on their hands and knees. It's like such a steep elevation. It's crazy. And the other thing is there are also stretches where there are briars like that are unavoidable. And they just like everyone in this documentary, every racer you see, their legs are just like completely torn up. It's like, I've heard people compare it to the Passion of the Christ. Like, it's just absolutely brutal. Like they're just getting physically torn to shreds, aside from the wear and tear on their feet and, joints and stuff.
Pansies.
So I guess I feel like maybe the final part of the main setup is the way that runners know that they're actually following the course they're supposed to be following and, completing each loop is that
Dead bodies.
yes, they have to find a series of bodies that were freshly killed by Lazarus.
Yeah, they just have to find the runners that were ahead of them that are now dead.
So at various points around the course, they stash bags that each contain a different book, as in just like novels. And usually it seems like they have kind of fun names. Like some of the ones we saw were Doomed or The Idiot. Or there's one called The End. Yeah, like, and each runner is given a bib number, which is standard for pretty much any race. But in this race, only odd numbered bibs are issued because the way they prove that they've done a complete loop is they have to find each of these books on the course and tear out the page that corresponds to their bib number.
And the number of those fluctuates. It's like some years it's 10 books, some years it's 13. Again, just Lazarus never making
Oh, really?
Yeah,
straightforward.
it seems like he's always trying to keep people on their toes, like even the veterans that have done it before. But yeah, so I mean, you're only considered to have completed a loop if you have all of the pages, from all of the books that are hidden out there. And
They're hidden. Yeah, that's the craziest part. It's like there's some people in
yeah,
this documentary, they're like, yeah, I just got stuck. I spent 2 hours looking for a book.
there's one guy who apparently a few years ago spent 32 hours out supposedly on this race, and he officially covered 2 miles of official race course.
Oh,
Like, it's just insane. Like, people get lost, people, like, I would imagine people get injured. It's just nuts.
I am legitimately surprised no one's died during the course of this.
Yeah,
That
I
we know
mean,
of.
same. Like, I expected that to be part of it.
Oh, and it goes under a prison, right, Joe?
Yeah, so good call, Blue. That is part something that's part of the race every year, even as the official course kind of varies. One thing that is always part of it is that they have to pass through this kind of, it's like a drainage ditch almost. It looks like it's this like little stream that goes under this tunnel that is under a prison.
Oh yeah, active prison. We should
Active
point out.
It
prison
is an
with
active
guards.
prison, which I can't believe nobody's gotten shot.
I feel like that's where they filmed the music video Firestarter by Prodigy.
Twisted
Yeah.
Firestarter. So it is Brushy Mountain State Prison. And the reason this is part of the course every year is that this prison is actually integral to the founding of this race. So this race was apparently inspired by the real life escape of James Earl Ray, who is infamous for having assassinated Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Boo.
Who indeed.
Are we booing Dr. Martin Luther King?
No,
Okay, just
Answer
checking.
carefully.
we're booing the
Boo-
assassination.
boo James
good,
Earl Ray.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. So
Context.
James Earl Ray, this assassin, apparently escaped along with some other prisoners from this very prison and was gone for 50 hours, well, just over 50 hours before he was apprehended. In that time, he apparently only managed to cover about 8.5 miles of distance. And as Lazarus's own legend has it, Lazarus saw the news coverage of this event at the time and said, well, shit, I could have run 100 miles in that time in the 50 hours. So that was the genesis of this race, is that he thought James Earl Ray was a bitch and should have been able to run more in 50 hours, basically.
And yet Lazarus has not incorporated bloodhounds into any of the races so far.
Yes, release the hounds.
That was such a good show.
It was.
Perhaps another episode.
I will say that Laz, as we those of us who know
We're
him call
affectionate.
him Laz. Yeah,
Yeah.
we affectionately call him Laz. He said that he's gotten letters and like people think that it's problematic that the race was inspired by James Earl Ray, as if it's somehow celebrating his escape, but he says that it is very much the opposite. So it seems like it is him kind of saying that James Earl Ray was not, yes, one of many things you could call him. So hopefully that is true and he feels that.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Yeah. And it could also just live up to his hillbilly namesake, where it seems a little ambiguous. Whereas, like, well, if I was
fair.
running from a prison, I could make it 100 miles, right? So
My Uncle Pappy made it 120 miles. I'm so sorry. So sorry, everyone.
yeah, we
Anyway.
James Earl Ray's a bitch. That's what we should just say.
Yeah.
Yes.
Period.
Yes, agreed. Again, so I mean that's kind of the main overview of the race. A couple other things. Runners have the option of taking a rest in between loops. So officially the only time that they're allowed to seek assistance, like even medical assistance or take any sort of break, is in between loops. So They run, they touch. There's this yellow gate that the race starts from. So they have to touch the yellow gate. That loop is done.
What's the deal with that yellow gate for the record here?
I think that's just at the state park, which
You know what that
I
reminded
don't
me
know
of? I was like,
what
this is what they did at the Village, I think. The M. Night Shyamalan movie. That's the gate that went into the Village. It's just Laz's land behind it all.
I mean, we can talk about.
Walks
There's
around in a bear
rogue
suit.
creatures on the trail, but just try to find the books. You'll be fine.
I mean, I have questions about just the legality and logistics of it, but we can get to that maybe in a little bit. But they call the period between loops the interloopal period, cleverly enough. So if runners choose, they can rest. Some people will actually try to get some sleep, depending on how far ahead of time they are. I mean, again, they have 60 hours to complete all 5 loops, so they have to kind of be conscious of where they're at with that whole thing. You know, a lot of runners will use this time to at least sit down for a while, hydrate, get some food in them, things like that. Pop some blisters, you know, fun times. But it seems like this is really the only rest they get. Otherwise, they're just going for it. I mean, as far as, you know, logistics and stuff, I'm curious about the fact that this does start from and in a state park. I don't know how much of it is on state land, how much of it is on private. Like, I don't know if it's all like within the state park. I don't know if there's any trespassing involved. I mean, the prison thing, like, I don't know if he has an arrangement. He would have to have an arrangement with the prison, I would assume, because they say that, you know, it is an active prison with guards.
Yeah,
I would think if these randos just showed up and started climbing through this tunnel, that might be trouble. So, like, I would assume that, especially after all these years, he has, you know, arrangements with all the property owners involved. But it just is kind of a weird thing. Like,
what if he has like a
seems...
relative at the prison and he's been doing this race every year as a cover to get that guy out of jail, and it just hasn't worked, so he just keeps up the tradition?
Amazing. Do you guys have any other thoughts on just the overall structure of the race?
Did you mention the water drops? Like the
Oh, I did
stockpiles of
not.
water? Yeah.
I did not. And actually, that brings up a wider point, too. So, the only aid that is provided by the race during the actual loops is, I believe there are 2 different water drops at various points. And one of the interesting things about the race in general is it's run March or early April every year, but apparently the weather in this part of Tennessee can vary pretty wildly depending on the year in that time frame. So some years it can be hot, and I think the year this documentary covers, it's pretty warm. Other years it can apparently still be freezing outside. And they mentioned that during some of those years, the water that they leave for the runners just freezes solid. And we get a nice little, you know, clip of Laz talking about, you know, people come back and they say, oh, it was like solid blocks of ice. And I'm just like, well, it's 10 degrees outside. So what do you expect? Like, just no sympathy whatsoever. Like, yeah, you dummies. Of course, that's what's going to happen.
That would be so demoralizing, right? You're
Yeah.
out in the middle of the woods, like this is a quote unquote race. You've already depleted like your entire water because you have like a certain amount of hydration guidelines you should be drinking. And you just have a gallon block of water. And I feel like I would just sit down and be like, all right, I've had enough.
Guess I'll die.
Yeah. Yes, chew it like a rabbit.
Can you run with the bottle just between your legs?
Oh, man.
Melt it a little bit?
Is that a scrotum joke?
No.
It is now.
What do you think, Blue?
I don't think I can run with a gallon jug in between my legs.
To be fair, in the footage we were shown in this documentary, I didn't see a lot of running taking place, period, so it didn't really matter.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's definitely you can see like it's 5 marathons. So if folks aren't familiar, like there's this thing, even if you're running a marathon, like folks will get this marathon shuffle where it kind of just looks like a glorified speed walk when you are basically hitting the wall of your glycogen reserves. And so runners are like trying to avoid this wall by training. And to be fair, after like when you see these folks that come in and they've completed like walking through the hell that is brambles and 20 miles and thousands of feet of elevation, and they just look like 1,000-yard stairs happening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is an interesting point. I mean, if you do the math, they have to basically complete an average of like 2.16 miles per hour, which doesn't seem terrible. But when you have to do that over the course of 60 hours and through this horrific terrain and elevation, and you can try to sleep, but if you do, you're probably going to fail. Like, it's the circumstances are just insane.
Yeah, it's like this is the part that I would add. It's like, okay, the race itself, it seems loosely a marathon, but it sounds much more of a mountaineering type thing or a land nav. This guy was like, when I was watching it at first, I was like, and messaging you all, I was like, hey, I think this army guy will stand a shot. And it's clear that he had zero skill in land nav.
Was that the guy that was the sacrificial lamb or whatever?
Yeah, they called him the sacrificial lamb. So again, this is where Laz comes in. Is every year he hedges bets as to like who is going to be the least likely or the first one to drop. And
apparently someone is specifically chosen for that reason.
Yeah, like he looks at the application and is like, I'm gonna put this person in the race.
Yeah, like this person is
okay,
no shot whatsoever.
And yeah, I was like, hey, this guy might stand a chance. I was like, possibly.
Yeah. So all right. Let's talk about the application process.
Yeah.
All right. So this is what I found online.
Nothing.
Not a thing. Not far off. It is very secretive, and it is very hard to find any information about it online. In the documentary, Justin, I think you mentioned, if not during the recording, then before, that someone in that documentary says that you have to basically take an exam as part of the application process.
Yeah.
So from what I found online, the only way to apply is to connect with someone who has run the race previously and get them to tell you when to apply. Apparently what happens is you have to send an email on a certain day. It's just one day of the year. If you send it outside of this one day, you fail, you're not chosen. So you send an email on this one specific day, which you can only find out from someone who has run the race before. After you send that email, you will receive a questionnaire, which is where the exam portion comes in. I don't know exactly what all is included in the questionnaire, but one of the things is you have to write an essay called "Why I Should Be Allowed to Run Barkley."
PTSD from high school all over again.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I would imagine that this is where, so in the documentary, Laz talks about the fact that he tries to select people that he feels are cut out for this sort of thing. And he kind of points to that as the reason that like nobody has died doing it, is that, these are people that are elite
marathoners.
Yeah. And then out of this, he does also select the human sacrifice, which every year is a person that is, kind of selected purposely to fail. So the application is super secretive. One wrinkle I discovered not long before we started recording, which, I mean, it makes sense. It kind of detracts from it a little bit for me, I feel like. But aside from being which, backing up, I should say that every year hundreds of people apparently manage to apply, but only 40 people are actually chosen to run the race every year. So it is, and I would imagine that number has grown since this documentary came out and TikToks or whatever. It's become more of a known thing, but it still is, hard to figure out how to apply. But apparently, aside from that, you can actually be chosen and offered a slot in the race.
Oh.
And you can accomplish that if you have proven yourself as an ultra marathoner elsewhere. Specifically, if you finish first in one of the other races that Lazarus organizes during the year. So one of these is called the Barkley Fall Classic, and that is a 50K race, which is apparently kind of a preview of the Barkley Marathons. So it's like a similar rough terrain course, but it's just, shorter overall run time.
It's about
And
31
apparently,
miles.
yeah. So the winner of that is apparently just extended an invitation to run in the main event.
That makes sense. Like that piece makes sense to me, even though it seems like you disagree with it. Because I mean, if you're
Well, it does make sense. Like they're proving that they're capable of.
they're invitationals, more or less.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
The other race that I read about that if you win, you can be chosen is something I'm really curious to hear Blue's thoughts on. It is called Big's Backyard Ultra.
mhm.
And this is another race that Laz hosts every year. So the setup for Big's Backyard Ultra, from what I've gathered, is that it once again is a loop race. You're just running a loop. The loop in this case is 4.167 miles. The format of this race is that you have to complete this 4.167 mile loop every hour and just keep running it every hour. The only way anyone wins this race is if they manage one more complete loop than anyone else.
Jesus.
So
Yeah, what
if two people tap out on the same loose and their same loop and they're the last two people left, there's just no winner for the race that year.
the crazy shit is, I went and looked at this. I was like, well, okay, that makes sense. Like, how many laps? The record is 85 laps.
The record is 85 laps, which is over 354 miles. And this guy did this in 3.5 days. How do you feel about that, Blue?
I was just dumbfounded. I think it is more like I don't want to spill what my conclusion about all this or what I think or the why on any of this, but it's just like, what the why does this exist? I don't understand. I don't know. I like, well, it seems interesting, and I think there's some other comparable examples that I think of. Like there's another really good documentary that I watched probably about a year ago called The Iron Cowboy. And it was this guy that did 50 Ironmans in 50 days in 50 states.
What?
And yeah. And I was
Was
like,
he actually Iron Man? Because
Yeah.
holy crap.
Literally
Yeah.
50 days, like travel included?
travel included.
Holy
Yep.
shit.
He would basically sleep on his motorhome. I think there's like some caveat with Alaska and Hawaii, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I don't. These are like hyper endurance events to where it just blows my mind that this is even something.
Were these
that
people
folks want to do.
alive?
Yeah, I have some theories, but I think we can get to that.
Yeah, I think we do need to talk. We'll talk about how many people have finished, what type of people finish. We'll get to that in just a minute. But yeah, like it's wild to me that this race where someone ran 354 miles in 3.5 days is like a qualifier for the Barkley Marathons.
Yeah. I mean, there's one too that's like, I don't want to take us into another tangent, but like similarly, there's a race that's in Sweden and it's indoors in the winter and you run them basically on 24 hours on a track. And that sounds like I would lose my goddamn mind and it would be like The Shining for running indoors for 24 hours. So like, I just, it's hard to be empathetic and like try to understand why people do this.
I was looking up other super challenging races here, and did you see the one called the Self Transcendence 3100 mile? It says it is the
No.
longest certified road race. You race for 52 days in a row, 59.6 miles per day. 52 days in a row of the race. You get
That's too many miles.
3,100 miles. The worst thing is you run the same loop every day.
The Sri Chimoy.
In downtown Queens, New York.
That's wild.
Picture
That is
running
wild.
60 miles in downtown New York, period.
Here's what I will say. There's one person that I do absolutely love. Is like one of my favorite sports heroes. His name's Terry Fox. He's Canadian. He was running basically a marathon every day and trying to run across Canada. He had a sarcoma of some sort. So he had a bone cancer that had spread, and so he was running, I think, on a prosthetic leg in the 80s, so not very advanced. But he basically was running across Canada. His cancer came back, and he, made it to somewhere in the Ontario province. But same, like, at least for me, I can be in Terry Fox's shoes because I can understand, like, he was trying to advance cancer research, which was pretty non-existent at the time in Canada. And so I think, like, Canadians to this day rate him as like the top athlete of Canada, next to who's the one, Steve Nash. So it's like I can understand it from Terry Fox's perspective, like why he was doing that. But like 3,100 miles or 354 miles, it's, I don't know, it's crazy to me to think
It is crazy.
people do this.
Well, let's talk about it. How many people have done this? So, as I mentioned at the top, the Barkley Marathon started in 1986. Nobody actually finished it until 1995. The first finisher was Mark Williams. His time was 59 hours, 28 minutes, and 48 seconds. So he came in just under the wire there. After that, there was not another finisher for 6 years, and in 2001 there were 2 finishers. At the time of the documentary that we watched, I believe only 10 people had finished previously. But as of the time of this record in 2023, a total of 21 people, or it's been completed 21 times by 17 runners. And I mean, that's another thing we can talk about as far as what type of people are doing this. Is it seems like there are a lot of veterans to this race, people who do it year after year after year. I forget if it was on the documentary we all watched or the one I watched separately, but there's someone who said that he was doing it for his 16th time. Like, it's just insane to me.
One thing I did notice about the demographics, at least in the documentary that we all watched, collectively, a lot of these people seem like they're surprisingly well educated. Like they're engineers, they're programmers, they're very intellectual people. Which I mean, not to say that I'm not implying that runners are generally not, or that the people who would be drawn to something that's a challenge like this are dumb or anything, but it just surprised me that like everyone they talked to was some sort of engineer, scientist, physicist, just people that you wouldn't necessarily.
I mean, look at this friggin' blue guy. He's pretty well educated.
Yeah, but he's also not doing the Barkley Marathon.
That's true.
I agree, Justin. I think it's a good point. Like, that's where I was like, if I was trying to get in the head of some of these, because these folks have PhDs.
Yeah.
For me, it was
I thought it was interesting because Lazarus comments on that and seems to point to the fact that there are so many people with graduate degrees and stuff as like those people are just like driven in general, which logically I understand where he's coming from, but just like practically in my experience, I don't feel like there is a huge crossover.
Yeah, you'd think there'd be some avoidance here. Like, yeah. I don't know.
I wonder.
Yeah, go ahead, Cody.
I was gonna say, I wonder if it's something to do with like those people are hardwired to have things come so easily to them that this is a way that they find something that's hard for them to actually accomplish.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it from that angle.
Maybe.
I thought it was like my mind went to I like challenge and I like to test what my limits like for them intellectually there's pursuits they like to be challenged. And for physically, I could understand if they're like, I want to push my body to its absolute limit. Mainly from like an experimental point of view. Because it doesn't seem in the course of the race that there's much of an air of competition. Like folks are just like, I want to see if we can get it done.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Like these guys are head cases more or less.
That's a good point, because the documentary certainly presents as there's a lot more camaraderie than there is competition.
Yeah, and you even see a lot of the, virgins, as they call them, will pair up with veterans, at least for the first lap or two. And it seems like, the veterans are kind of happy to guide them along. What's up, Cody?
I'll pop your blisters for you.
That's so gross.
I'll pop your blisters.
What do you think, Blue?
I can't imagine running a marathon at night, running up a mountain. Like that just seems stupid to me. For me, the other like anecdote or analogy that I thought of, like, have you guys ever read John Krakauer? Like he author of Into the Wild.
I know of him, but I had not read anything by him. I don't believe
the book. The one guy, Jeremy McCandless, he gets lost in Alaska. John Krakauer wrote that book, but there's another book that he wrote. It's a nonfiction book about summiting Everest. And for me, I can't understand why people summit Everest. Like, is it a piece of tourism? Is it a physical challenge? Is it pushing the boundaries of human, physiological or athletic limits? Like, I just think no. Like, people have a death wish, or they like to seek adrenaline, or they're adrenaline junkies. Yeah. This is like the same boat. It's like I don't understand the why here. Like, I don't see the appeal. It's not like it's an organized sport, or like you have any sort of benchmark of whether or not you completed it or you didn't it. You didn't.
Can I read you a quote that I think might help explain it?
Yes, please tell me why, Joe, because I don't know. This is just stupid.
You can't really tell how much you can do until you try to do something that's more.
Yep, that's unhelpful.
That is Lazarus Lake. I mean, yeah. I feel like I do kind of get it. Like especially if you are already like a runner and is specifically an ultra marathoner, that this is kind of like the ultimate form of that, or like one of the ultimate forms of that. I mean, I on some level kind of understand the appeal of just wanting to accomplish something that so few other people ever have.
It's true. Like, I am being facetious because I understand too that I ironically have done a half Ironman, and I was like, so people look at me like, why on earth would you do that? And I was like, well, for me, I didn't know if that's something that I could do, and I wanted to see. And so like, I can understand from that angle, but at the same time, like, I think that would be my threshold, is like, I don't want to be bloodied by walking through a bunch of briars or tripping over
looks so bad.
a rock in the middle of the night and falling face first, like several thousand feet.
I just also want to point out here, between 2006 and 2019, apparently 66% of the people who attempted to get to the top of Everest made it.
So it's wow.
That's easy peasy compared to this. Come on.
Yeah,
it's true. I'll say some quick stats. In that documentary we watched, the current record was set by Brett Maughan, whose time was 52 hours, 3 minutes, and 8 seconds.
We have him with us tonight. Brett, how are you?
Brett! In the subsequent documentary I watched about this year, the record for the slowest finish was set.
Oh, man.
Which was 59 hours, 53 minutes, and 33 seconds.
Nice.
Well, wasn't there was a guy that got lost, and he came in like 18 seconds shy, but he had gotten lost and disqualified based on the course.
Oh,
he finished 6 seconds after 60 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing I think I had mentioned earlier that there was something that I saw in this other documentary that was related to the fact that runners are going in opposite directions for the fifth lap.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't even express to you how like invested I was and how stressed I felt when I saw this.
Oh no.
So
Knife fight.
in this year's race, there were 3 runners who made it to a fifth lap. So 2 of them were going the same direction. One of them was going the opposite direction. And
They high-fived when they passed.
no,
Oh.
what had happened was, we talked about the fact that they proved that they did the whole course by bringing back the pages from the books that are placed around.
Yeah.
So if you're going in opposite directions, you're going to be collecting your pages in opposite order. And apparently this year, after the 2 runners who were going the same direction collected their pages from the book, a civilian who is not involved in the race found that book, and he apparently was aware of the Barkley Marathons. He found the book and just assumed that the race was over and brought the book back into the main camp before the 3rd runner had a chance to collect his page.
Oh shit.
Oh my gosh. That would be
Well,
devastating.
so everyone's like worried that he's going to just like kill all his time looking for the book. What ended up happening was he apparently was like certain of the location of the book and did not waste time looking for it. Like he's actually the one who had, actually, no, I take it back. He wasn't the one who had the slowest finish. But he came back and was just like,
what the fuck?
about to like fall over, and he's like, one of the books was gone. So like he knew that the book was gone and like managed to actually successfully get a win.
That's great that he had the wherewithal, like
Yeah.
nearly 60 hours into that.
Yeah, like to just have that certainty. I mean, if he had, I believe it was Aurelian Sanchez who finished in 58 hours and
You
some
know
change.
him, Aurelian.
The
But
winner?
I mean, if I feel like he could have easily spent an hour or 2 trying to find the book to no avail and just like screw himself over.
So a civilian actually turned the book in, you're saying?
Yeah, the civilian
Okay.
actually found the book and just assumed that the race was over and brought it back to like Lazarus and the people at the camp.
Well, thank God, because if they were like, hey, this is a souvenir from that race these crazy people do, like they could never prove that then.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, they
Yeah.
would have never even known.
Oh,
It
It's
was,
wild
it
to
was
me.
just
Wow,
freaking
that's-
crazy. But like
that's
everybody at the camp is like, oh, I hope he figures it out. Like,
yeah.
The piece that's crazy to me is they come in, they can only get aid when they're in the camp, like you said.
yeah.
And then like one racer said they like burned 7,000 calories in like a single loop,
Yeah.
which is absolutely crazy to me. And I just don't know how you replenish any sort of like fraction of those calories.
Yeah.
And
No.
then you go right back out in it. Like I don't know how you
Yeah.
don't just collapse.
Yeah,
and
I mean, you
not
see,
having
well,
any
people
energy.
do like, well, let's talk about that a little bit. Like, we saw, I think it was John in the documentary we all watched who finished the race, but like, literally, he was just like falling over. Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
the cane at their little stick, walking stick.
He
at
did
the
not
end.
look good
Yeah.
going off for the last
Like,
lap.
No.
Alexis said, and I mean, I don't mean this, in a bad way, but Alexis was like, he looks like an Auschwitz survivor. Like, and I mean, not to make light of that situation, but like this guy literally like looked like he was just gonna like fall over and die.
Was he the one whose
Like-
wife was or girlfriend or
Yeah.
whatever was trying to get him to eat the banana, and he was just like,
No,
no,
that was
I'm gonna
Brett.
No,
keep going."
yeah, that was Brett.
Okay,
Brett was
okay.
like, I've had enough. And I'm like, no, you haven't, Brett.
No,
Yeah.
no.
That was Brett, who's actually the record holder. No, John was the last one to finish, and he just like he did not look good by the end of it.
Brett knows what happens when you mess with bananas. He's played Mario Kart.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember, was John the one who was hallucinating too?
John was
Yeah. I
think-
hallucinating.
yes.
Yeah, like,
I mean,
and that's the thing is,
yeah.
Started when he
looked
applied.
awful.
It seems
his
like-
feet were being lanced.
yeah, he's the guy. Yeah, but like, So in the other one I watched about this year, there was another guy who like made it to the like literally fell onto the yellow gate to finish and like just fell on the ground. And like
Jeez.
I think he also said he was hallucinating. And like it sounds like that's not super like they talked about someone else who had like ended up in like a different county or something and was hallucinating and like had to be like picked up by the police and brought back. Like, I
Holy
mean,
crap.
well, I
I
mean,
mean-
Blue, you probably have a much better idea about this than any of us. Just like the toll that that sort of thing could take on your body. Like, I can't even imagine.
I mean, I don't. I think honestly, that's probably more the sleep deprivation than anything. Like, I don't feel so. It took me the longest I've ever done anything. So my half Ironman, it took almost 7 hours. It was 6 hours and 45 minutes to do that. I was tired, but I wasn't hallucinating. I have to think it's like the sleep deprivation, like being out in the elements and just being shocked from that. And
Yeah.
then just overall having
Dehydration is probably part of it.
yeah, like I think it's probably all those factors as opposed to yeah, I can't say from my
Well,
experience that I was
I
hallucinating.
can tell you though he's not here hosting tonight, but our host Brett, when we were camping when we were younger, tried to see how many days he could stay awake at the campground, and he started to hallucinate, and that was like with full food and drinks and stuff. So I don't think it takes very long.
Yeah.
I've ended up hallucinating from lack of sleep at one point. It was back when I was working at the paint plant downstate. And,
What? Wait a second. What's this chapter of your life?
oh, it is. There are.
I think it was the
boy.
pain that you were
Never heard
hallucinating from.
this.
I'm an onion. I'm an ogre. I've got layers. So yeah, between when I first went to college and when I decided computer science wasn't for me, and I took some time off, I ended up working at an automotive paint plant downstate. It was a German company. I'm not going to name drop it here. Just know that it was owned by Germans. They were generally pretty good, except when a deadline was looming.
Ironically,
which
Dutch
case-
boy.
So when there was one there was one project we were working on, we just couldn't get the color right, so I ended up working a double shift, so like 16 hours, just under the hot lights, work, trying to dial in this color so that it was accurate to what it needed to be. It was very long, hot, just grueling work. And sometime through the second shift that I was working, I was under the lights, just working on some of the panels, and I looked up, and I swear it looked like the light above me was melting and about to like drip down on my head. It was the weirdest damn thing. I blinked, I rubbed my eyes, and it sort of went away, but it never quite got back to its normal solid state in my eyes. It was the strangest thing. So lack of sleep can really mess with a person sometimes.
What about how much paint fumes did you have access to? Like, let's
I
isolate some
mean-
variables here.
Well, let's just put it this way. There's probably a good reason I'm not having kids, because working with some of those solvents, they dissolved the gloves I was wearing on my hands. So that may have played a role too. Who knows?
Yeah, regardless, don't stay up for 3 days straight.
Yeah.
Agreed. Well, any other thoughts about the Barkley Marathons?
I mentioned in the chat that, I would never try this in a million years, but I would actually genuinely be curious to go out and just walk or hike a loop.
I mean, and
Yeah,
at some point, I'm going to ask you all to give me a scale of 1 to 10 how much you would like to attempt the Barkley Marathons.
Which reminds me, I haven't really told you guys what we're doing for the Man Olympics coming up. So
Oh boy.
you'll be walking a 4-mile loop for
short little drive to Tennessee.
yeah. If that's the question, Joe, I feel like I'd be more interested in Big's backyard ultra. Because I does not appeal to me to be like hiking through brambles, up a mountain, down a mountain at night. Like the nighttime and unmarked trail does not appeal to me.
They have headlamps. It's not like it's
Yeah, it doesn't
hard.
matter though. It doesn't. Yeah. I'd say
mean,
it's
I would-
probably
I
like a
would do
2 or
all that
3 out of
part.
10.
What
I
was
would
that,
like to do
Cody?
the application.
I said I would do all that part. I would go in the brambles, and I would do the night kite. And I mean, when we lived in Marquette, we used to run up and down like Hogsback and stuff at night.
Yeah, but those are marked trails. Like
Mhm.
this is just like, oh,
They were less marked back in the day, but yes, that's
Yeah.
true. Well, I'd have a map that I got 37 seconds to look at, so
True. In a row?
probably
Oh,
not.
man.
They probably split that up too somehow.
Probably.
Well, I guess since Blue gave his rating of 2 or 3, I guess let's. Does anyone have any final thoughts, or should we get into the rating?
I can work my final thoughts into my rating,
Yeah.
I think.
Sure, we'll go for it. Justin Henry, final
Okay.
thoughts, and how strongly would you want to be part of the Barkley Marathons?
Well, I would be up for at least hiking the trail. I like a good hike. This would probably be a bit. This would certainly be more than I'm used to. But if I wasn't hurried for time, and if I could actually just pick my way through and not feel like I needed to race against other people, or that I needed to do it 5 frickin' times, I think I could actually enjoy.
You could do the fun run, which I forgot to mention. If you do 3 loops, they call that the fun run, and it's better than not doing that, I guess.
Which I saw online apparently still has to be within 40 minutes. Like it's still prorated. Which I didn't
40
realize.
hours, you mean? Or
40 hours.
Oh yeah, 40 hours. Yeah. Yeah,
I didn't know.
obviously.
But yeah, so in terms of like going along the trail, I would be pretty willing to do that. Participating in the actual marathon itself, I would not be anywhere near as likely to sign up for that, even if I got an invitation. Because growing up, my dad was big into what at the time I thought were pretty grueling runs across like uneven terrain, difficult, undergrowth and stuff. The one that comes to mind was called Dances with Dirt. He did that multiple times, and it was a 50K run through swamps and brambles and up hills, down hills, loose rocks, things that they were still marked trails, but it was not easy terrain. And even growing up, I thought, holy crap, that's pretty extreme. I admired the heck out of him for doing that, and that pales in comparison to something like this.
Your dad didn't kill MLK, did he?
I can neither confirm nor deny that. No, my dad did not.
All right, just
kill
checking the
MLK.
timeline, see how it measured up
oh
there.
boy.
I used to do this run
no.
through the woods.
No, this was actually in Hell, Michigan, is where the Dances with Dirt marathon,
Appropriate, nice.
run rather, not marathon, but and there's even one that's happening this weekend in my neck of the woods, the Marquette Trail 50, which is also a 50K, or depending on if you want to really push yourself, there's a 50-mile version of it too, which I think it takes you up. It's not I think it is Hogsback that it goes up. But yeah, it's just kind of like all through a trail network around the surrounding area where I live. I remember a few years back before COVID, my wife and I were kind of just hiking along Hogsback, and we stumbled across some of the trail markers and looked it up later. It's like, holy crap, they actually ascend this mountain as part of the part of the foot race.
Go run that, and maybe Senpai Lazarus will notice you.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. These are much smaller scale things that just they astound me that people can do them.
Mhm.
In terms of me actually being willing to even think about trying to run the Barkley Marathons, 0 out of 10. There's no way in hell my 40-year-old ass is ever going to be capable of doing that.
Cody.
I mean, realistically, I would not have a shot at this. So in terms of me actually doing it, also 0. There's just no way it's feasible, or even in a wildest
I mean,
dream.
I'm talking about interest, though.
But let me finish. In terms of me actually registering and going there, 5 out of 10. And here's why. This was my plan as I was watching the documentary. I would go there with some fake resume that I'd provide. I would walk the first loop, taking like 20 hours. Then I would nap for like 9 hours. Okay. Then I would get up and do 1 loop at night and come in and say, I give up. And they'd be like, you didn't really do that well at all. And I'd be like, I know, but I did do 2 laps.
Yeah.
Walk
and then
out.
you get taps, which is another thing I forgot to mention.
Yeah.
When each person quits, they are greeted by a person playing taps on a bugle.
You know, I was just wondering if we put this podcast online and we do a hashtag Barkley's Marathon, if people are going to start asking us for information about how to get into this thing.
One
Well,
way
why
to
not?
find out.
Wow.
Maybe we'll get invited.
Ooh, first podcast on the scene.
Joe, what about
Yeah.
you? What's your rating?
All right. Well, Cody kind of stole mine. I mean, it's completely ridiculous and like probably literally insane for people to attempt this. I am in no physical condition to, actually try to run this thing and do 100 miles in 60 hours, but I would probably go as the human sacrifice. Like, honestly,
That's true.
I think it would be fun just to kind of what Cody said. Like, I think it would be fun just to get out there and like walk the trail and see what it's all about. It would just be like a once in a lifetime experience. Again, I mean, the more athletic side of the whole thing is just not going to happen, but I too like a good hike. I love being outdoors. And this thing really just weirdly kind of captured my imagination. So I think it would be interesting just to be any sort of part of it. So I think I would probably give it a 5 out of 10 as well.
5? You guys are crazy.
We're not saying we would win. I mean,
Oh.
No one's saying there's
tempered expectations here. Is this private property at any point?
We don't know.
That we're not sure about. Like I was saying that before. I don't know if this is like all state park property or if there's private property involved. Or
Could
what
we
the
just
deal
go
is.
down and do the trail ourselves right now? I mean, we wouldn't know the actual trail, but
So actually I did read a little bit that like so it starts on like the actual
state
marked
park.
trails from the state park. But apparently legally you're only allowed to go on the actual marked trails in the state park, so you can only see like part of it. I don't know if that means that this race is not being held legally or if that they just have like special arrangements to skirt around that and do whatever. But
I mean, does it surprise you with Laz here? Like, it seems like he's a little unscrupulous.
that's true.
he operates outside the law.
But
Yeah.
it sounds like from an above the board perspective, you would only be able to like really see a limited amount of the whole experience.
I mean, you just need somebody to get a picture of you standing at the sign at the gate, and then another picture of you on the opposite side of the gate with like
That's true.
salt.
You could go
just
visit the
covering you
yellow
or
gate.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Overall, I mean, it's interesting. It's a unique race. I do not see myself wanting to do it. I could just watching it and seeing like when they were lancing people's souls and like basically the guy took off one of his socks and I couldn't tell if it was cream or if it literally looked like he had trench foot from just being sopping in sweat. And I was like,
Yeah, I was trying to figure that out too.
I thought it was like, talcum powder or something.
It looked like
dry
there was
out
both, I think.
Yeah, talcum to dry it
guess.
out. That makes sense, but it's
Well,
just like,
he said something though about like, are my feet going to get any better? Or like, I think that at least to some extent his feet were just that messed up.
I thought the nasty
Yeah.
stuff was some kind of cream they put on, but I could be
yeah,
wrong.
it looked like some sort of like Desitin or something to prevent from chafing. But yeah, it's like I'll be transparent. It's like I'm running like 8 to 10 miles now because I'm gonna run the Dallas Marathon in December, and like my feet are still building up mileage and they bark at times. And it's like, can you like if I'm at 8, I can only imagine what like 130. Like I would want my legs to be amputated. Like that's probably you're in so much pain between the neuromuscular pain from just overusing your muscles and then also like all the lacerations that are still probably flesh cuts. Like it just seems like it's a sadist or masochist.
Yeah. Like Alexis and I were kind of talking about that. You on the one hand, you would think that after that you would just pass out and sleep super well, but also your body is probably just so inflamed that I'm sure you wouldn't necessarily be able to like sleep that easily. Like I'm sure you're dealing with that for probably like weeks afterwards.
Yeah. It's cool. It's like nothing but admiration. It's like I have no interest of like wanting to attempt that. I would maybe consider doing an ultra. but not this one. Like, it just seems like I just, go and people watch to be like,
Well,
this is
you'll see
fun.
Cody and I in a documentary next year.
All right.
That's right. Serving food to people,
Here, eat this hot dog.
playing bugles. Yes.
All right. Anybody got anything else on the Barkley Marathon?
We
It
are
was
going
a
to do
fun topic.
celebrity
Yeah.
version. The Charles Barkley Marathon will be happening soon.
But yeah, we live in a strange world with a lot of very strange unknown things going on just outside just outside the borders of our perception.
And that's really, I think, what fascinated me so much about this is like, this is something that nobody has really heard of. And it's such a bizarre thing. Like, Lazarus is such a character. It does feel like kind of a like mythic event that's just happening on the fringes of our known society. And I mean, I'm sure there are more things like this around the world that nobody has ever heard of, and it's just fascinating to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. So I give this a 1 out of 10 for could it be real?
Yeah. Let's rate Lazarus on a scale from 1 to 10. Do you think he's a real person?
Lazarus is, I'm going to count him as an adventurer, and he's going to be my Halloween costume. So,
Nice.
boom. There it is.
I think that's probably about going to do it for this episode. So we're going to sing ourselves off as if we were trapped in the middle of the woods in Tennessee. Fun, 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 fun.
That's what you guys would sound like if you're trapped in the middle of Tennessee.
Fun.
Okay, so sorry, before we wrap it up, one more thought I had. I don't know what. No, like,
Pause this. Okay.
I don't know exactly
Take us out
what
of
the
the outro.
situation is in this part of Tennessee, but like, I know that in Tennessee there are like rattlesnakes and bears and like all kinds of shit. And,
Oh, we
like,
hadn't considered that.
They don't
yeah,
try
I
this.
wonder how much of a factor wildlife is in this area. Like,
That
that's just
is a really good question.
It's probably minimal. Probably it's like, well, I'll just hang around this almost corpse, and if it dies, I can eat it.
The rattlesnakes are pissed off. They don't know the route exactly. They're like, oh, God.
Yeah.
True. Everyone's just lost out there. Anyway, I don't want to get too far into that rabbit hole. Let's wrap this up.
All right.
This has been another episode of Friends.
Juggalos for life. March on Washington. 2017.
Lazarus is coming right for me.
I'm dead. But pew. Star Wars scream.
And scene.
This ain't a scene. It's a goddamn arms race.